Det här är en fågel!
Vi får så himlen icke.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse, a show about art, culture, politics, philosophy, all with a true right and mostly Nordic perspective. Now, we broke our pure Nordic perspective last week when we did the black metal stream, and this show too is a bit out of the ordinary in terms of our regular schedule, but I hope most of you have found the time to watch this live. If not, I hope you listen back at a later time. If you're watching this live, feel free to join the chat, and I think this is going to be an enjoyable talk and an enjoyable episode. Tonight we are talking about NATO. We're going to be talking about its history and the roles and consequences that the Ukraine situation has upon its members and maybe Europe in general. As always, I am joined by my co-host Ludwig Path.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be back again. So, yeah, for the chat, you've basically been catfished. Prudentialist is not coming on, but we have some other fun tricks.
He's on his way.
Joking, of course. He will show up there.
Both of our guests tonight are on their way. It's happening. We're just running a bit late. We're having some technical difficulties, and all of this hit at once. So
yes. So Walrus was chat enough to do the face reveal.
I'm doing a face reveal. I hope you all like what you see. If not, I will never be showing my face again. I'm getting comments on my beard, thanks. It's actually a bit short right now because I trimmed it the other day. I was getting tired of it because it's getting warmer here. So during winter time, having a beard is very nice. But when it gets warmer, it's nice to slim down a bit on it.
Yeah, I mean, I usually wear my beard all year round. I don't. I just
I usually
trim
go
trim it whenever.
Like
trim it whenever I feel like it just gets too long. Generally, it's not in the way that I usually notice the heat difference.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
That's just some trivia.
Sure.
Nordic talking about the ballsiness of the face reveal, but I mean, we said, I guess you assume that Prudentialist will do his face reveal as usual. I mean, it is I guess it's sort of part of being taken seriously as a sort of political, like you say, political movement or.
Yeah, so get all your jokes about phenotypes and stuff about my face out of the way right now, and then we can move on. All right.
Yeah, I might do one later, but yeah, you'll have to keep you waiting.
It's a requirement, but I want it to be, usually the Prudentialist, the guest who we'll be having on later. He shows his face, and I feel it's only respectful that if he's a guest of our show, then I should show my face so we can have a bit more of a conversation, at least across the ether, the online internet ether, face to face. Now, I see that Burr Carl here has joined us in the lobby. I'm going to try to add him to the stream.
Hello.
Hello,
Hey.
There you are.
Oh, you got the cam on.
What?
I see a cam.
You see a cam, yes. I've decided to do an official face reveal here, so As I joked about a minute ago, the chat can get all their jokes out of the way right now, and then we'll get on with it. So, from Finland, of course, we have Burkarl returning, and some of you may think that Finland isn't part of the NATO, but that's also why we wanted his perspective on this, because we've covered before that Finland is one of those in-between positions between the West and the East, and there's been some rumblings about NATO in Finland. And I'll add our final guest here I see in the lobby. Welcome from across the Atlantic.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hey.
I feel bad because I heard that you were expecting me to show my face, and alas, I am not.
No, that's fine. It was an assumption. I might just turn it off maybe, but we'll see.
You look
now,
fine.
The cat's out of the bag, so what?
I said you look fine. Ignore the chat.
Now, I'm quite a layman when it comes to international politics, so that's why I managed to rope in some help in the form of the Prudentialist here this week. And he may not need an introduction, but if you're unfamiliar with his channel or his socials, I recommend that you check out his YouTube channel, probably The Prudentialist, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
There's a lot of excellent geopolitical analysis, but there's also philosophy, and recently you've posted some, I suppose story times is almost the correct...
Kind of, yeah. Just trying to branch out a little.
Right. I've been appreciating those. It's one of those painting a picture of the world. It doesn't always have to be, purely factual. It can be, interpretive, and it can be told in different ways. All right. So I have some issue with my chat. Just give me a moment. I see someone in the chat asking, quick question, would you ever consider some shows on Iceland or the Faroe Islands? That would be interesting. Usually the way we've done this on the Longhouse is that we have people volunteering as sort of people from that country volunteering to cover them and to do sort of the research on it. So if there's anyone from Iceland in the audience for some reason that feel like they want to contribute to a future stream about its political situation, I'm more than happy to look into that. Anyway, I think we should get into the main topic of the stream. I forgot to say, we talked about this on the black metal stream, but Prudentialist, it's you're Orthodox, and it's Orthodox Easter, isn't it now?
Yeah, I had just left liturgy. I'll have to be back at the church around 11 o'clock tonight, and all of the great Pascha stuff gets to start as soon as the clock strikes.
Mm-hmm.
So are you from an Orthodox family, or are you like a convert?
Convert. My journey has nothing to do really with the online part, more like you kind of confront death's door and you just happen to meet someone who tells you to come and see. So
Yes.
it's kind of weird kind of talking about it, where it's just like, oh right, there's this whole online thing of religious Christian and pagan personalities, and it's just like, oh right, that's a thing, whereas this journey's been primarily not focused on the internet.
Right.
Yeah, see, I thought you were actually in one of these, a Catholic at one point, because I've sort of grouped you in with this kind of dissident Catholic community, like with the Distributist and what's it, Settlers Lament and these other guys.
Oh, I mean, Dave's a great influence on me, and I think he's a great influence. I think I'm getting a lot of people started into sort of that sphere of dissident politics. But no, I mean, prior to this, journey religiously, I mean, I did go visit other churches. I've been to a traditional Latin mass. I went to various Protestant low and high churches, but I found myself here.
That's cool. I didn't mean to pry. It's a little bit.
Oh no,
off,
you're fine.
topic,
I'm
but
quite
it's just
open about it
interesting.
if people ask.
Well, anyway, happy Easter.
Well, thank you.
I see that Orthodoxy clearly didn't branch out in Finland because paska literally means shit in Finnish.
Well, not everything translates so easily.
No. Okay, I'll throw up my presentation I made here. Now, as I mentioned, I've tried to do some research on the history of NATO here, because I wanted to present sort of like an overview for people who, well, myself included, don't necessarily know all the details about what it's all about and what its role is in modern times. So feel free, if anyone have anything they want to add while I'm talking here, just jump in and add your own commentary. So we'll begin with a bit of an overview, and then we'll look into a bit of the history, and then at the end we'll talk about its current position, and we can have sort of like a free-form discussion on current events in regards to Ukraine and the fallout, I suppose, that we're expecting of the war and the various sanctions, etc. All right, so NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty, is a defensive military alliance, I suppose, and later also an organization, and it aims to promote cooperation and peace among its members, is the official line. And it started in the, let me think here, it started right after the Second World War. I'm blanking on the name of we'll get to it later. I think it's 1947. It starts as a treaty between France and the UK, and it's lasted ever since in some form or another. Any nation in the world has the capacity to join NATO as long as they, quote unquote, share NATO's core values, and as long as other members agree that they should be able to join. Now, that's been expanded a bit in later years with various sort of like preparation programs and technocratic pipelines, so to speak, where a nation can work its way into NATO status. But we might get into that later when we're talking about Ukraine. So we'll just jump into the formation and the early years of NATO. So in 1947, France and the UK signs the treaty. I think it's called the Treaty of Alliance and Mutual Assistance or something like that. Also dubbed the Treaty of Dunkirk.
That sounds an awful lot like the Treaty of Friendship and Mutual Cooperation.
It certainly does. That might be it. Which basically is to guard against any attacks that might come from East Germany into West Germany or from the Soviet Union. Really, it's a little more than that. It's an expansion of. I don't know the details here, but this might be an expansion of the treaties they had before the war. But I'm no history buff.
Yeah, I think before the war they only had a signed treaty of guarantee as regards going to war together, but no alliance as such like this.
Right. Moving swiftly along, in 1948, the Benelux nations, that's Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, joined the treaty. And in 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty, which then becomes NATO, is officially signed. And this happens at the quote-unquote insistence of the US. This is to some degree an American project and part of the Truman Doctrine, which we've talked a bit about before on the show. And I don't want to be too negative towards NATO, but I think it's important to notice how much of the sort of current, what we call the GAE, the Global American Empire today, was set up through these kinds of alliances and doctrines in the post-war period. We covered the Norwegian internal political struggle between the left and the communist left on whether or not they should accept Marshall help or the Truman Doctrine at all. I think that was, Ludwig, is that the first episode we did?
That is the Norway episode.
Yes.
I mean, it was quite superficial, but we did cover a bit about
but
this. This was the sort of contentious thing, whether they wanted to be like a part of the Soviet bloc or they wanted to be a part of the sort of United States empire, quote unquote,
and that's
that sphere of influence.
Yes, and that's my point. It's not, this isn't one big, huge conspiracy necessarily, but you can follow the thread all the way back to the post-war decisions of the U.S. in terms of its cultural influence on our nations today. Now, this also included a number of other European nations. So it was the U.S. and it was Canada and it was a bunch of other. Let me see. It was Norway. It was Denmark. It was Iceland. Hang on, let me pull up the notes here. Just give me a moment. So the founding members, here we go. It was the United States, Canada, Portugal, Italy, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland were the founding members. Now, they added on later, but we'll get to that in its own time, I think. Let's see here. In 1951, NATO established its military branch. Now I call it specifically military branch because it is not an army. NATO doesn't formally own its own army. It's each member nation volunteers forces and equipment and resources to joint operations, basically. I don't have any more detailed view than that, but it's not necessarily a separate entity, but it has its own sort of command structure on the grand scale, and that's the military branch. And it's also implements then in 1951 the precedent of foreign station forces, meaning that as we have today in Norway, there are US troops stationed at our military bases or at their own military bases in Norway as part of the NATO alliance. Which I think further displays the enlargement of the American influence. So that's the early 1950s post-war setup of the NATO. It's mostly a defensive alliance at this point, and it doesn't do very much until after the Cold War, really. And we'll get into that right now. So we'll get into a bit of post-Cold War, because I'm just jumping ahead from 1951 to basically 1992 when the Berlin Wall falls, or I guess 1990.
I think it was 89, actually.
Oh, sorry, yes, 89. I'm getting my dates mixed up here.
89, the wall falls. December 26, 91 is the fall of the Union.
Ah, okay. Maybe that's what I'm mixing up. I also have 92 for something in my notes, so I don't know what that is. Maybe it's something left over. Anyway, my point is, nothing much happens really of note in between these years, other than Greece and Turkey joining in 1952. Germany joins in 1955. Spain joins in 1982. And then there's the German reunification on October 3rd, 1990, which then sort of brings in the rest of Germany into the NATO alliance.
So these green countries then were, formally under the Soviet, basically sort of Warsaw countries.
Yes.
And you can see, like with the sort of black ones here that are like the earliest members. It's if you only think about the black ones, it's a lot more smaller. It looks a lot more vulnerable against the sort of encroaching kind of Soviet influence that is just pouring out of Russia from the time. I think like most of these countries, if I'm not mistaken, like the green ones were under basically Soviet control by the time the NATO was started.
Yeah, and I think it was in '52 when Greece and Turkey joined that the Soviet Union found out and started to see the plan. And that '52 is when the Warsaw Pact was formalized.
And this is already after long-standing issues inside of Greece. You'll know that proto-CIA OSS stuff takes place there, and the Greek elections and trying to rout out communists. So, I mean, what had been happening already, it just gets formalized. The only thing that happens really pre-collapse Soviet Union besides Greece and Turkey is, of course, German reunification that we see there, that 1991.
So I'm wondering a bit about Spain, looking at this map here, if they're joining basically in the 80s, but because they're quite sort of land-wise, protected, like they have these France and Germany and all these other states between them. So if they had some specific motivation for joining, if is that like some sort of nuclear scare or something, or
you're talking about West Germany?
No, I mean Spain.
No, Spain. Sorry.
Yeah. If they're the ones who come in the 80s, if that was because of because they were afraid of nuclear.
I think this was because this was after the Franco regime fell.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's post Franco.
Mm-hmm. Which then turned Spain into a democracy, which basically means that it's part of NATO now. I mean, it follows ideologically that they would be interested in that, I think.
Yes.
So it's a bit of a meme, I suppose, but looking at this graph from the Russian side, I think we can all agree that there's been some enlargement of NATO. And for someone in Russia with long memories, they will remember that I think it was in the 1990s, or specifically 1990, a lot of Western leaders assured Gorbachev at that point, who was the leader of Soviet Union at that point, that NATO wouldn't expand any further east. But the other thing that happens in between the Berlin Wall falling and this early period is that France withdraws from the military branch in 1966, which is an interesting development. But other than that, it's not much of note. So, of course, the Berlin Wall falls, and sort of the general trend, from what I can gather, please let me know if I'm wrong here, but on the continent of Europe, is that there's a reduction in both military capacity and military spending. And then, as a sort of built onto that, NATO sort of finds itself without a purpose, quote unquote. A lot of people, I think, were thinking that NATO had fulfilled its purpose and it was time to shut it down. I can find I found some sources on that, but instead it did what any good governmental body does, and it realigns its goals to fit more in with the newly forming messaging from the powers that be, and so from that it realigns to spread the message to outside nations and lobbied heavily in the Eastern European countries. And you can see the fruits of that on this graph in the green colors. These are all in the 1990 to 2004 period. A lot of previous Eastern Bloc countries now join NATO.
So on the note of French withdrawal, you also have to keep in mind that this is during the sort of Gaullist period that we see under Charles de Gaulle, and sort of that intergovernmentalist attitude that he has. This is also the same time of the empty chair crisis of what was then the proto EU in regards to the European community. There was an absence of leadership, an absence ideologically as well of this idea of having a functionalist, communitarian style of interstate governance with respect to their economies. And de Gaulle did the same thing, really, with NATO as well. So, 1966, the French forces removed themselves from the integrated command, and the leadership of NATO, which is SHAPE, which I believe stands for Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, which is sort of their operating command structure, had to move from Roquencourt in France, outside of Versailles, to where it is now, which is in Mons, Belgium. And yeah, I mean, de Gaulle and and even to this day, right? Because even in 2003, when there was trying to build up coalition partners to invade Iraq, the President Chirac at the time had threatened to withdraw from the alliance entirely, not just military and anything like that, but completely withdraw as a sort of a response to the Americans. But it didn't really happen. But it's a long-standing thing within sort of American and NATO foreign policy in this area that France has got a very unique and specific independent foreign policy to, say, NATO, or what we would call the United States in general.
That's interesting, yeah. And as someone says in chat that de Gaulle is a very strange character, and it's hard to say whether he was based or not, says John McNamara. But I think he was certainly a bit of a France first type of guy, if nothing else.
Definitely, I think in that regard, I mean, it still stays. I mean, France did eventually return to full participation in 2009. So I think that was the 60th anniversary? Yeah, 60th anniversary of NATO. So that's what they did, was they came back into the fold.
Right.
Yeah, I think with the collapse of the Soviet Union, if we think about the confrontation against it as the overt and explicit aim of NATO in the first place, I think it can be compared to someone who, a human being who has this one goal and achieves it. And what happens usually is a reversion to the base nature. And in NATO's case, that happens to be the Serbian campaign.
And we'll get to that in a moment. Actually, we can just hop right into it with a slide I've decided to call Humanitarian Adventures. Because from the mid-90s and onwards, NATO plays an important role, and I'm using their language in this. They say they play an important role in international crisis management, which has landed them in quite a few controversies throughout the years. And excuse me, the first one obviously is the Bosnian War, and later the bombing of Yugoslavia, where there in 1999. I'm not sure if anyone want to mention anything on the Bosnian War. I don't have a lot on NATO's involvement in that before I go further to the Yugoslavia stuff.
I would start actually a little earlier before you want to talk Bosnia. I would start with perhaps
start wherever you'd like.
Well, I mean, we can talk it, but I would also start with sort of the Rome summit in 1991. This took place in November. and this was sort of that reconfiguration. What is the strategic goals? What is NATO's mission creep, so to say?
Uh-huh.
Um, and so, this is at a time when Germany is reunified. Um, and this was a proposal for reconfiguring the NATO military purpose.
Yep.
So emphasizing smaller forces, more quick reaction QRF forces, rather than just a widespread defense of Europe against conventional assault. You'll kind of notice how this has changed since then, in part because of our current position with Russia in
Uh-huh.
present day, although it's a little, you can't just say present day without thinking about, Transnistria to today. But I
No,
mean,
but I noted in my research, even though it was quite surface level, a lot seems to have changed in 2014, specifically with the Crimean
yes.
invasion.
Well, not even just Crimean invasion, but also like the enlargement, and I'm sure we can
Well,
get
sure,
into
yeah.
some of that post stuff. But I mean, the Bush administration really does change from the 1991 discussion, because a lot of the emphasis then is on sort of the fulfilling of the promise of ballistic missile defense. So a lot of emphasis is placed on a lot of anti-ballistic missile and interception technologies, and that are what was promised at the beginning of the administration before the war, if I recall correctly, was the sort of promise for a protective anti-ballistic missile system throughout Europe and American aligned countries, which has yet to come to fruition, but is still something that it has been a focus and a way for other countries to have sort of an incentive to join.
Right. And so in the, let me just bring up my notes here again. So in the Bosnian War, and specifically again in the bombing of Yugoslavia, NATO draws quite a bit of controversy throughout the West for a bombing campaign they do against Yugoslavia in, I think it's the spring, early summer of 1999. And in their words, the reason for this bombing campaign was to stop, or I think this is actually Bill Clinton's words, it was to stop a deliberate, systematic effort at ethnic cleansing and genocide. Which is, on the surface, fair enough. But this has since drawn a bit of criticism from a lot of people, both in the United States and in Europe, and without that, the danger or the casualties had been significantly inflated by NATO and the Clinton administration. And of course, disagreements were at the time voiced by the typical outsider nations like Russia and China, and they claimed that the bombing was against the United Nations Charter that states that military interventions in sovereign countries is illegal without permission from the Security Council, is it?
Yes, but keep in mind, in this in this conflict, that there was a Security Council resolution. The number escapes me, but it had to play a role, I think, in regards to in enforcement. This is where you start seeing sort of the blue helmet meme kind of come around.
Well, yes, that's kind of
Yeah,
my point here. Yeah.
yeah, about reaffirming previous things about the banning of military flights. So I mean, that did come into play here. Yeah.
I suppose the criticism from detractors of NATO and the UN and these sort of escapades, I suppose, would be that they're doing a bit of shoot first and then investigate later, and it's a bit of the police investigated the police and found that the police did nothing wrong situation.
Yeah, and I mean, they enforced sort of the no flights in there by basically establishing the no fly zone, which I think was Operation Deny Flight. And they started using fighter aircraft in the region, making sure that no one else kind of started flying over the country.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
But they did get involved. I know, because I mean this is where sort of the bombing starts, right? Is providing close air support to UN forces on the ground in '93.
Yeah, but as you said, well, in fairness sake, most of the NATO involvement before this was purely sort of keeping the airspace clean
Yeah.
for the Western forces or for the. All right. So this is just hitting quickly. Yugoslavia was a thing. A lot of people say maybe that wasn't a good idea. Maybe this isn't within NATO's, purview. And the picture I chose here I think is from Yugoslavia, which is a bit of a boomer truthing going on with the NATO with the swastika in the middle. And I'm trying to sort of frame this. I'm framing this a little bit in a devil's advocate way, just because someone coming from within a NATO nation wouldn't necessarily think that NATO has ever done anything that can be questioned, really. So I'm just trying to get to objectivity by being kind of negative right now.
Yes, just quick mentioning doing the swastika the wrong way is probably the most boomer truth thing possible.
That's true. Okay, so in 2001, there's this thing with the World Trade Center towers in America, in New York, and Article 5 is invoked for the first time ever, and only time. I don't think it's ever been invoked before, or after. I mean, by the U.S. And as the NATO claims in one of their own videos, I found an old video from like 2014 about what NATO is doing these days. They say that in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the United States, allies, and partners all deployed forces to Afghanistan to help bring stability, which I think is a wonderful way of putting the Middle Eastern campaign. Now I know it's more complicated than that, but I feel like in 2020, most people would say that maybe American intervention in the Middle East was a bit of a mistake. I mean, 2022, sorry.
I mean, it was a popular sentiment even earlier. I mean, Trump famously campaigned on it in 2016. I think one of the few people, yeah. But I mean, there's a great article for your chat and yourself, if you ever get the chance to read it, in the American Affairs Journal, and it came out like a couple months before the Afghan withdrawal and that sort of fiasco. It was called Data-Driven Defeat, and it was basically that the military goals were, by all military measures, accomplished with historical levels of success, like 12 casualties or something along those lines. But the aftermath of what on earth to do afterwards became nothing more than a series of bureaucratic objectives and maps and goals and these flow charts that made no sense and ways to make money into it. And the narrative shift really doesn't change until around 2010, 2011, when you start seeing the emphasis on schools, education, women's rights. There needed to be a continued reason to be there, outside of some of the more, I think, practical geopolitical realities that came into it. So mainly, like, because there was no concrete win condition, you kind of had to make one up as you go along. And people like Nicholas Haldo, myself, and I think even more professional individuals realized that Afghanistan was sort of this Western like pigeonhole, for at least when the Americans were still there, for keeping out Chinese interests from moving further westward into the Middle East.
Yes, and I would find it pretty odd, but in addition to NATO forces, there was also, since this is a Nordic stream, I would say there were Swedish and Finnish forces as well. I'm not sure if there were any others, but from Finland there were, at the peak, I think there were about 36 people. Not a lot, of course, but there were a few deaths, and people in Finland were, of course, wondering, like, why are we here? We are not even in NATO. But there we go.
I know that Norway had at one point, I think at the most, stationed 600 military, or I suppose people, or I don't have the breakdown of what they were doing, but there was 600 soldiers in Afghanistan specifically. I'm not sure about Iraq or any of the other ones. And of course it's, excuse me, a wide array of things that these forces would be doing. It's not necessarily just fighting. It could be training, or it could be working other sort of jobs that are not necessarily frontline jobs. So I don't have the breakdown of that. But regardless, I think if I'm going to keep with my theme of being critical of what's happening here, I would say that Norway then has signed a defensive alliance in 1949 that in 2001 is being used to attack a country pretty much on the other side of the world for us. And while I appreciate the realpolitik in having a defensive alliance, I feel like this is a bit of a shift in goals, and if that sort of follows in the same way that you prudentialists were talking about, with how, you know, some of these can sort of get taken over by bureaucratic interests instead of military interests, maybe that's something that's been slowly happening to NATO as well.
Well, we've definitely seen that post collapse of the Soviet Union. The issue is that, and I think this is something that you'll see a lot of perhaps more right-wing commentators talk about in America, whether it's like Thomas 777 or myself, where it's just like the United States is really good at fighting the Cold War, and pretty much that. Like you'll notice that, like in 2011, Obama's pivot to Asia had that very Truman Doctrine-esque containment idea of stopping China. And I mean, NATO is doing the same thing. I mean, there's the tragedy, right? And this is, again, if to reference good old Mearsheimer, what makes it a tragedy of great power politics is that you don't want a good defensive counter block to just dissipate or go to waste, because what is something that you don't want to do when you're sort of a liberal state with a liberal project with a liberal economy in the West is that you don't want something illiberal to challenge it. And so why not repurpose NATO to potentially contain, any sort of geopolitical ambitions from, say, an illiberal state or an oligarchic or authoritarian state? I say these in quotes because it's not like we're any better, like that of Russia.
Yes, it echoes a bit. I've talked about it earlier on other streams, this Liberty or Equality book by Kunault Ledeen, in which he attacks democracy and modern liberalism in that sense for being all-encompassing and without compromise. It does not have room for any other systems or other opinions, and that seems to follow in the geopolitics as well.
So I've always wondered with these things, especially with the bureaucracies taking over, how much of this is being driven by just pure idealism and how much is being driven by this kind of sly realpolitik.
That's an interesting question. I don't know if we have the answer to that here on this panel. I certainly believe when you look at, we have some experience with the current General Secretary of NATO, Ludwig, as he was previously the Prime Minister of Norway for 8 years. And I know him to be very good technically in terms of his economics and state technocracy credentials. And I'm sure, if nothing else, he believes that he's, doing something good. I don't think you see yourself as evil
Yeah,
in that
I
sense.
think so as well. Like especially with these people that they're churning out of Norway. I think these people are like they have a degree of general idealism. I don't see
Mhm.
them as like these Henry Kissinger types. But I wonder how many of those people. But in some way, I'm almost just more comfortable having these realpolitik people, Machiavellians, in power, because they can actually, deal with reality and not get lost in this sort of liberal kind of theology view that it seems like more and more people are adopting.
As Leo says, Stoltenberg is a very Blairite creature in the chat, and if nothing else, I think it's. I know that academic always rags on Tony Blair, and maybe he's just the master manipulator of all time. But at some point, you have to sort of believe the lie you're selling if you're going to sell it well.
Yes, I mean we might have to do a stream on Stoltenberg, do some digging on him. I have a difficult time thinking that he is like that Machiavellian.
He is an acknowledger, though, of just basic realities. I think before even the American government decided to not make official intervention, like not actually, deploy troops or deploy air forces or, actually make overt moves. Stoltenberg had said that, like, listen, NATO's not going to be doing any of that because we're not
Yeah, he
triggering,
was,
the war.
Yeah, it was quite early with relatively early with it compared to the Americans. I remember that. And we were also a bit late on the sanctions as well. Norway hesitated for a bit. So we tend to be ever the eternal merchant Vikings. We we like to consider our options before we
You got to consider what's profitable.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing, though, that kind of comes to mind is just that the interesting sort of historical power play. Because as an American, I'm not as intimately familiar, so I am glad that all the Nords are here. Is just that the sort of, especially with like Finland, for example, just the Russo-Finnish War. I don't imagine that they'd want to be dealing with anything akin to that again. I can't imagine that. I mean, there was a whole Netflix TV show about like Russian occupation of Finland a while back for oil. And I know it's on Netflix, but
There are no oil reserves anywhere near Finland. So
well, it's a Netflix show. I could be getting it wrong. I just saw the blur, but I'd imagine
is it like
that
a
there's
modern time show?
yeah, it's
about
like a
Russia?
modern day
Oh.
show. So like I think around this time, it came out a few years back.
That Netflix show must be working on some really big Finnish irredentism. Like, yeah.
I couldn't tell you. I would imagine, though, that the cultural memory probably plays a role here in some of the more Nordic area politics in regards to NATO.
Definitely.
I'm googling a bit. Is this the show called Occupied?
Yeah, that one. I just saw it one time, and I was just like, "Oh, that's weird." But I'd imagine that has some, purpose.
I imagine it has nothing correct. This is the first time I've heard about this. Like,
you would think that it would be more relevant to place that in Norway, considering we actually have oil reserves. Russia would be interested in.
It's actually about Norway. It's actually
okay.
Norwegian produced and about occupying Norway for oil.
I've never heard about this. This sounds like it would be very subversive.
I guess I just put the link in the chat there.
Let me pull that up to.
I just don't pay attention to Netflix that much, but maybe we should try to go through some of these Norwegian produced series.
I'm gonna get so black-pilled.
I knew they did one on like the sort of Israel Accords or the Palestine. What was it called? Like the sort of Palestine deal. Yeah, the Oslo Accord. That was it too. It's something we could get into maybe another time.
Nordic television. There you go.
See.
But yeah, no, and you mentioned that he's sort of a Blairite and maybe not as crazy. The real crazies that you need to look out for are just those that work for the Atlantic Council and who write and tweet for them, because whatever they put out is typically what is going to be offered as a white paper or a policy position in a couple of months, and usually it's some pretty deranged craziness.
Interesting. What did you call it? The Atlantic
Council. I've had a run-in with one of them, and I needless to say, I don't think I'd ever want to talk to that person again.
So, and these people just post like insanity on Twitter as well. Is that it?
Yeah, there was one that this tweet was deleted, but I will send it to you via DM real quick so we can just have a fun old time with this one.
Yeah, sure. I'm always down for dunking on people.
Yeah, but this guy, he's got some advice for NATO, and I believe he writes for the Atlantic Council.
Let me pull up the image here.
So they're very influential.
Very, of course.
Oh, now it wants me to log into Twitter because I tried to open it in like a... Can I just share the screen?
But yeah, he's one of these blue check marks. I mean, his bio is just basically economist and author, Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe. My latest book is about Russia's crony capitalism.
That sounds like standard blue checkmark stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Give all the arms, open the Black Sea ports of Ukraine. Bomb relevant Russian cities? What the hell?
He's a Swedish economist, so
Leo, you have to defend us right now if you're listening. Yeah.
This is some real Karl den Tolfte energy, right?
Yeah, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He's also the chairman of the International Advisory Council at the Center for Social and Economic Research. And his focus, of course, is on economic transition from centrally planned economies to market-based economies.
Are we at this stage?
Wow.
He's saying we're at this stage. I don't feel like we're even close to this stage. What the hell?
2 days ago.
Oh, it's not even like an early tweet. This is 2 days ago. Holy shit.
Prudentialist, okay. When you say like expert in transition between the centrally planned to market economy, I think about like 90s Russia, this kind of robber capitalism.
Oh, it was just international carpetbagging. So to borrow some lines from Southern history, yeah, I mean, it was just international carpetbagging. Expose yourself to, rich financiers from abroad that are really keen to get in.
Yeah, and we I mean, imagine what that must have been in. We talked about on the black metal stream on Thursday. Vingel had posted a documentary that I watched later that day, and we touched of course on Varg, and he talks about when they were young and when McDonald's arrived in his town, they would go with was it BB rifles and shoot at them because they were so scared about this capitalism coming into their countries. And I can't imagine how many stories there must be from Russia about things like that. Anyway,
now McDonald's is going out of Russia, so it's
yeah, I wish it would get out of here as well.
Well, it does remind me, I think it was during the bombing of Yugoslavia that Thomas Friedman of the New York Times had written that famous bit on democratic peace theory. And I think he had made the quip about how no two nations with a McDonald's had ever gone to war with each other. And 3 days later, we started that bombing and there was a Mickey D's there. And it was just all right, liberal democratic peace theory with Mickey D's has been disproven in 3 days. But I mean, a lot of people still run with that, primarily due to arguments of trade interdependence and similar structures of government. And I mean, that's a huge question in sort of the international relations sphere, is how important trade and your relationship goes with that.
Certainly.
So would the Russian invasion of Ukraine be the second time they break that McDonald's rule?
Probably. I mean, we had to build the McDonald's first, I think, when we went into Afghanistan. So that's how you know you're occupied.
You build it on the way in, and then the Americans bomb it again on the way out.
That's going to be right there next to it's all those green texts from like when we were pulling out of Afghanistan, right? Where it's just like the last Marine guard
Oh,
of
right,
the US
hiding out in the
embassy,
McDonald's. Yeah, I
hiding out or
remember that.
defending the McDonald's, and you had all the Spangler posts about like be like the last American Marine dying at his post at the McDonald's in Kabul because he wasn't ordered to be, dismissed.
Yeah, that was a great event for the memes, at least, if nothing else. All right. So we spent a bit of time on this here, but I put in Libya in 2011 with the Gaddafi stuff. Is there anything we want to touch on there that we haven't touched on already?
Rest in peace.
What was the pretext again for the Libya? Was it human rights abuses? That was the reason they would go in and invade it.
That's a good question.
Well, human rights, and it's also, I mean, it's not like getting rid of Gaddafi was something that wasn't already of particular interest before. I mean, Libya was bombed during the 1980s under the Reagan administration. Gaddafi and the United States never had the very strongest relationship, whereas probably with other nations they did. But you add in the Arab Spring, you have it spread. Gaddafi tries to turn it down. To quote Hillary Clinton, right? We came, we saw, he died.
Right.
But keep in mind that Libya has an interesting history as well, with foreign policy sort of being this thorn in what you would consider the Western non-proliferation side. When the Soviet Union collapsed and Kazakhstan became an independent country, it had, I believe, the fourth largest nuclear arsenal on Earth before it denuclearized. And at the point in time, Gaddafi was talking to like Kazakh leaders and was just like, I will pay money to get a sort of like pan-Arab, pan-Muslim like nuclear weapons program going. I will fund this, which is a neat little history bit before. And of course, nothing came out of it, but there was always been the pursuit for ways of states to sort of be recognized internationally on stage. If you buy into like the Kenneth Waltz nuclear proliferation argument, he'll argue that more nuclear armed states sort of rationalizes countries, because usually nukes, if you're going to pull the red button or turn the key and push the button, is the end of the world. So you kind of have to be a little more rational. And that it sort of encourages peace because no other countries want to deal with other nuclear armed states. That's why the Russia-Ukraine thing is so crazy, because we're deliberately supporting and arming a country fighting a nuclear armed state, but everyone knows where they're getting the money and the weapons from because we're so public about it. But yeah, that's just some fun Libya tidbits there.
Yeah, I've read about Gaddafi. I mean, apparently he was quite ambitious with this sort of I think he tried some sort of pan-Islamic program, and then that didn't work. So he wanted to do like this pan-African Union. Not successful with that. I also watched, I think it's in the Adam Curtis documentary Hyper Reality, where he talks about Gaddafi being used as a kind of heel for Reagan. In terms of how they presented the foreign policies, where the United States has had a good relationship with the with Gaddafi, and then a bad one, and then a good one again. I mean, there's almost too much stuff there to.
Well, I mean, it was it was so permeated in the culture. Wasn't it Libyans in Back to the Future, the first film where he gets shot up?
Oh yeah.
So I mean, it's there, but also I'll offer this as a weird like personal like story, because I was living in Germany in 2011. I was a teenager in high school, and we had gone on this trip, and I guess the leader or like one of the SHAPE allied commanders was giving a speech there, and there was a flyby over the top, and there was just this like, yeah, those are like NATO F-15s or whatever, like about to deliver some ordnance to Gaddafi, and everyone was like, yay! And it was just a totally different period of time, because it's just like, this is 2011, we had just killed Osama bin Laden, and now it's like, the rest of the Arab world's going to be a democracy. So a radically different time for young Prude and his idealism.
And I'll add, as someone who was also in middle school at the time and remember this Gaddafi stuff as well. I mean, it was in the papers for a long time. Like, they were building him up as like a real villain for quite a while, even all the way up here in Norway. And so when we finally, we're gonna go kick Gaddafi's ass, and he's got like his royal guard is just women because he's a sexist, and things like all this weird kind of stuff, which then sort of gets you into we're gonna bomb the shit out of them, and you don't really think about what you're like. I mean, when you're in middle school, you're not really thinking about what you're doing.
Yeah, I think Gaddafi played into that hyper reality stuff very well. Like with the sort of female security guards and the plastic surgery and all this sort of stuff
but
that
it
he
all
was
got
into.
spun into some weird stuff when it like reached us, is my point. So when you said like he played the heel, it seems like he played the heel almost willingly. Anyway, I want to get into some current events and basically modern NATO stuff.
Mogged.
This is from, is it 2019, I think? A photo op / meeting between Zelensky and Stoltenberg.
What is it with manlets drawing the world into chaos?
Yeah, that's I couldn't not include this picture when I found it. You said Mog Luddick, and I couldn't help but include it. But I wonder. This is a bit of a what if. But you mentioned that Stoltenberg was quite quick on the Ukraine's not joining NATO thing after the war actually started. But would they ever have joined NATO? Because I know Zelensky and his generals were pushing quite hard for it back in like 2019, 2020, obviously because it's in their interest. But the response from NATO seems to have been quite like chilled, really all forever on that.
Well, this isn't the first time that Ukraine was in open discussion for NATO expansion. In 2008, this was a topic of discussion. I think the Bucharest conference in 2008 about having Georgia and Ukraine join NATO. And at the time, I believe it was Germany and France that were sort of looking at this and were saying, let's not add Ukraine
It was
or
Germany and
Georgia.
France.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, what the South Ossetia thing takes place 2008, sort of as a response. I mean, even early on, even prior to this, Russia sort of looked at, I think the foreign ministry at the time had looked at what happened in Yugoslavia and was just like, yeah, this could happen to us if this keeps coming closer and closer. So to play both sides here, I mean, you can kind of see some of the tension.
Uh-huh. And certainly I'm sure the making noise about Ukraine joining NATO plays part of the political game in terms of like dealing with Russia. In a sense, if you play that up, you can put Russia on edge. But I mean, you never know, because suddenly you've expanded and they're gonna invade Ukraine. That would never happen. I'm trying my hand at some irony here. I was just thinking, would it ever have happened? And I'm sure if Ukraine actually, like we're saying, we're going to join NATO or something like that, I mean, wouldn't that just trigger an immediate Russian invasion of the Donbass as it's happened now?
Well, the counter right would be that Russia didn't seem to have any strong military objection. I mean, there are other NATO nations right on its border, right to the north, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. I mean, that would be the quick response I think you get in reply to this. But I mean, you had an apparent shift in government right in 2014 that sort of adds as the impetus to get 2014's Crimean annexation kicked off right after the Olympics, kind of similar to what we saw here. And I think a lot of the things that I think would have been really more concerning about Ukraine joining NATO now, prior to the invasion, was that you've been dealing with this ongoing conflict now for what, almost eight years, and from there you have these Russian-backed separatists. It would be very easy to have the Ukrainian government, if part of NATO, just invoke Article 5 and just bring NATO even closer. Sort of not giving, not accomplishing much, I think, in that regard. Plus, not to mention the other issue that others have raised, right, is that you get the repeat of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Essentially, you're going to be placing ballistic missiles, or potentially with nuclear capabilities, right on Russia's border that can get much closer to Moscow than, say, our other strategic locations. That was a concern I had heard from Russian commentators and people in my various chats that I hang out in. So, there were some concerns laid out, but I mean, there's also economic, geopolitical, a civilizational view of themselves. So it does vary, which makes
And
all of this NATO interplay all the more important to talk about.
it would, in a sense, be more dangerous than the sort of the Cuban Missile Crisis, if you're looking at it from the Russian side, because of the missiles that would be placed there today would be a lot faster than any missiles that would be placed on Cuba back then, in terms of the response time for your defenses, or just for, how much time do you have if the alarm goes off to push the counterattack button. So it would certainly be a more unstable case for Russia to have these missiles close to Moscow.
I was just wondering, since Norway also does have a small border with Russia, are there no missiles in Norway then?
I'm not aware that Norway has any sort of missile agreement. I'm sure they have their own military equipment pointed in that direction, but I don't know if they have anything explicit.
No, we don't have anything like that, I think. We have, the only thing we have is, joint operations and military station military from the United States and NATO forces at times. But right now, as if I recall, it's actually a quite low number. So we would be, having a hard time if Russia decided to invade tomorrow, I think.
Well, yeah, Norway is still, with the border on Russia, quite hard terrain, and the Baltic, where NATO already also has a direct border with Russia, that there's no strategic depth to really be as much of a threat as something like Ukraine would be.
Yeah, I think it's a lower priority for Russia. If they ever wanted to do anything like that, it would be lower priority. Now, I'm glad we are back a bit on the Nordics, because I wanted to touch on the while we're here, I wanted to touch on the NATO discussion in Finland, Berkarl. You mentioned something about that earlier.
Yes, it's pretty funny actually seeing all these English language articles saying, Finland joined NATO. It already happened. And all these headlines come out, and people post them at me, and on Twitter, on Discord, on Telegram, everywhere. And all I see is I go to the state media website and see that the application for joining NATO is still in parliamentary. It's not even in parliamentary debate yet. It's still being prepared to be tabled, to be put into parliamentary debate. So the process is not yet happening. I mostly think it's international pressure trying to get Finland into doing so.
It's part of the war narrative then, isn't it?
Yes.
We have to make sure everyone is against Russia. Well, I mean, that's war, isn't it?
Well,
first thing that goes is the truth. Isn't that the saying?
Sure, but Finns are disposed to be against Russia, be it pro NATO or not. So there's that. And what I think the media campaign has actually been international media campaign has been very successful because almost every party in our parliament is now pro NATO to some degree or another, even though every single one of them, except the National Coalition Party, has been anti-NATO, literally a part of the appeasement governments, licking the boot of Stalin and so forth. But even these parties are now rooting for NATO in government and preparing the articles. So what this has caused is, well, basically, I think there's a parliamentary election next year, and they really want to get the application through before that, because there's a lot of small parties rising up on an anti-NATO bill. I just watched a small party debate, I didn't catch the end of it because the stream was starting here, but every single one of them was anti-NATO for one reason or another, and it's very likely that there's going to be very heavy movement in Finland in the political field, if we are to believe in democracy, of course.
So it's not as cut and dry as a lot of the international news seems to be.
No, the international news is very much trying to meme the thing into existence, and honestly, I think it will happen because they move faster than the elections roll around, of course.
Well, fair enough, yeah. And to be fair, not to be too pessimistic here, but I feel like memeing things into existence is what we do these days, right?
Exactly, and that also means that our enemies can do that as well. Or never mind, not enemies.
Well, I mean, just that's whether or not you're friend or enemy. That's what you're engaged in these days.
I guess.
John McNamara in the chat says that Ireland is having the same issue as Finland, but neutrality is enshrined in the constitution, so there's a lot of issues with it legally.
The Finnish constitution is something that has been trammeled on so many times. It's a joke.
Okay, I want to transition to, since we have your geopolitics expertise here, Prudentialist, I would like to ask, this might be a bit of a general question, but I'm interested in sort of I called the stream the fallout of the Ukraine situation, because we're seeing a lot of secondary effects in terms of economics and maybe even politics as a result of the situation in Ukraine and all the sanctions and everything. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on sort of the state of Europe in the coming years. Is this going to hurt? I guess.
As if it hasn't hurt already, I think.
Fair enough.
What has been interesting, and there was a really good Wall Street Journal article about it earlier this month that was talking about how the US and the EU, despite these officially listed sanctions, are they're still buying Russian oil and natural gas. Tankers just have to go to different places, and it's a little harder to track. So I
did notice an article in a Norwegian paper actually this week with like a big oh, this tanker is carrying Russian oil, and like
they were shaming.
Yeah, they were shaming the tanker because it's carrying Russian oil and is docking on sort of Norwegian ports, and we're going to be using Russian oil or something like that. So yeah, it's certainly it's still going. Yeah, you're right.
It's the energy of the soy jack screaming about Russia again.
If only we could find a way to make that an actual energy source, we wouldn't have a real problem.
Yes. The real problem is that the oil is Russian. But yes, Let me just check my notes here for a moment.
The other thing too, right, is that in response to this, I mean, the Yamal Europe pipeline, they had reversed the flow.
Uh-huh.
So I mean that was definitely going to affect a flow there. Um, and Reuters had reported, I think, just the other day, saying that Gazprom had not booked any gas transit capacity for the pipeline for May. So things have still not changed for energy resources there. And I mean, this is already in the backdrop of natural resources being both in Ukraine, but also in parts of European politics as well, whether it's Nord Stream or that when Crimea was annexed and the sort of conflict had started in 2014, Ukraine as a country had lost almost 4/5 of its entire natural gas reserve, or like its potential. The estimates were that Ukraine was sitting on somewhere around like 5.3 trillion cubic meters of natural gas that they could potentially exploit and use for resources and whatnot. And the territory that's either been contested or seized or has some Russian control has now that's a significant majority that Ukraine has lost. So, I mean that's an easy thing that we can track as sort of the energy politics of it. The obvious thing that I've put a lot of focus on lately is just analyzing the agricultural situation.
I was
So
going to ask you about that next. Yes.
yeah, so Ukraine and Russia provide most of the grain and various kind of oils, for food. Not to insert the seed oils joke, but it is there. For
It won't affect me. I've been disrespecting seed oils for a couple of months now.
king shit. But
A couple of months.
uh,
That's new.
well, it's a good start.
Well, yeah, I didn't know about it until like past like last year, like in December or something.
Welcome aboard.
This is what happens when people get on Twitter with a slightly right-wing opinion.
Yeah,
but
I wasn't much on Twitter, so that's probably why. Now I'm part. I guess I'm hooked, so I'm gonna have to uninstall it or something.
Yeah, well, I've been trying to take breaks from it and to no success, and it's a real curse. But to get back onto the subject with Ukraine and Russia, I mean, most of the grain exports from Russia and Ukraine go to the United Nations World Food Program. So many African countries are very much completely dependent on Russian and Ukrainian exports of grain and various sunflower oils and whatnot, and that is going to throw things into disarray. I had a conversation with sort of a patron, but also a resident man on the street, Hunger the Dye Merchant on Twitter. You can find him. He's got family in Lebanon, and he grew up there, and they're already out of bread basically due to Ukrainian exports and poor government management. So, I mean, you're already seeing riots and political turmoil that other countries are kind of beginning to take advantage of. Like Saudi Arabia, for instance, has basically promised that if you put a pro-Saudi government in the next election, that will dump like $3 billion into the country. So, I mean, Middle Eastern politics play a backdrop in here, and this is already in the context of COVID and the various economic downturns that came from that, widespread issues of inflation. Iran was having some issues over rising costs of living and food prices, also due to these, I would guess, disruptions in the market. That's one issue. The supply chain crisis, which has been years in the making. There's a really great talk at Wheaton College about that you can look up. But for instance, over 50% of the world's semiconductor grade neon that is required for semiconductor production is made by two companies in Ukraine. And since the invasion, those two companies basically closed up shop and they're not producing it anymore, which of course triggers concerns for the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company that is in Taiwan, because they rely on those two companies. They say they have a strategic reserve, but for how much longer can that really go on when so much production comes from there has been disrupted? So those are just some preliminary fallout that you can examine and then just kind of realize that some of the quality of life problems are going to continue. The prices of automobiles, I would suspect, will continue to rise for most countries because most vehicles have so much electronics in them. It's ridiculous. I've told this anecdote before, but I find it a little depressing when local car dealerships and where I live are doing commercials talking with great excitement that the microchips are back and that they can sell more cars. So those are just some things that you can look at for fallout.
Yeah, listening to all that, all these insane food riots and all that happening in the Middle East, and when I draw it back to our first world problems with the market impacts, at least here locally, if I'm gonna play this local correspondent role. For example, the fuel prices here were already before this so high that even though they went up here during this whole shebang about 50%, they were already so high that honestly the percentage of the increase as compared to America, I was doing some comparing, isn't as much. Like in America, correct me if I'm wrong, it's gone up like 5 to 10 times the price of basic petrol and everything, whereas here locally the price was already so high that it doesn't go that much higher.
Yes, that's one of the things I've been playing around with on a couple of our later stream or earlier streams, is what the political fallout in sort of the local, or I suppose the national level throughout Europe is going to change due to this. Because if power is going up, if gas is going up, if all of this is happening at once, and people realize that, well, it's really because our politicians have been selling out for 70 years, and now, nations that we don't really affect in any way can do things that cripple our own economy. We're going to have a more sort of protectionist and nationalist slant on things. Or maybe, people just chug along and, the gamers are going to be sad for a while because the graphic cards aren't showing up, but then things are going to go back to normal. I don't know.
I think this is very easily contained in like this two-party system dynamics. Actually,
Maybe.
this sort of two-party system tends to contain most political issues, where you can sort of stay kind of loyal and happy with your country as long as you keep telling yourself that it's like the other party that's messing up the policies. And I think that's reading these newspapers and looking at comments, that's sort of what I'm seeing. It's like, oh, it's the new government that came in. It's sort of their stupid ideas that are putting us in this position. So when we get back the other guys, then we can, it's good. It's going to be back to normal again. And of course it doesn't.
Yeah, it's the current government's fault that we're like 20 years behind on like our infrastructure spending.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's how the normie thinks about this.
Yeah.
So I'm really more interested in if this is like shifting how political elites think, or like the things that Prudentialists talked about with the fallouts. If the people who can actually make decisions are thinking far enough ahead in terms of these other consequences, or if they're just like complete, this kind of like global media brains who get in on this sort of screaming soy jack choir, pro Ukraine against Russia and so on.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting times. I'm getting a message here. Maybe this is sensationalism, and I haven't been able to like confirm it yet. But apparently Zelensky is now asking to meet with Putin over peace talks. So maybe this is coming to an end sooner rather than later. But
live on air.
Live on air. This is
Fight me in real
very
life.
live. Well, yeah. I'll meet you we'll live stream a Zoom call with
In the ruins of Kharkiv.
Yeah. Anyway, let me check here what the chat is saying real quick before I look over my notes. If anyone have anything they want to add, feel free to just talk while I do that.
Let's see what the news has to say. See if we can find anything.
Monopathalmos are asking, how are food prices in Norway compared to usual? Rising, but not too bad. But I think it's going to be rising for a couple of years. And the central bank has flagged that the interest rates are going up, which means that people are going to have less buying power, which means that indirectly, the food is going to get even more expensive. So it's going to put us into, I think, the range of Norway usually isn't a country. You hear this from time to time that X% of Americans can't pay an unforeseen bill on Y dollars. And I think it's going to put us into, a lot of people are going to be put into a situation like that in Norway.
Yeah, it's going to be the middle class in Norway is quite big, but well, it's not going to get bigger. Let's put it that way. It's going to get smaller. It puts the squeeze on a lot of people because I mean, people are well-to-do here and they have a decent amount of money, but the amount of debt per household is actually surprisingly high. And if they start yanking up the interest rate again, that's been historically low for many years now, people are going to feel it.
Yep. You wanted to add something on the current events Prudentialist, or?
Oh, I was just checking whether that. Apparently, on Saturday, he had made a public statement saying that he would like to meet with Vladimir Putin to put an end to the war. He had said in a news conference at a metro station at the heart of the Ukrainian capital, I think that whoever started this war will be able to end it, adding that he was not afraid to meet Putin if it would lead to a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, which is a slight change in his tenor when he had said not too long ago that he was not willing to really, you rule out peace talks in Moscow while Putin remains in power. I guess it's from the same conference.
Yeah, it might be. Maybe the news I'm getting is a bit hyperbolic. Okay. So, I think we covered a bit of the history of NATO here. We've covered the current events. If we have anything more we want to talk about in regards to the fallout, I just wanted to get your all's thoughts on what the future is going to be for Europe with this, because I feel like this is in some way or another, it's a bit of an example situation that's going to be, sort of referred back to in the years to come. Well, it started with the Ukraine thing. I think.
Well, I think I mainly want to share the Finnish perspective on the whole question of why so many people have suddenly turned, mostly normies who before didn't really like America that much, because there is still the legacy of being a Soviet satrapy until the 90s. And people still don't really like America, but the recent turn in favor of NATO is quite strong, and it has polarized the local population in quite a way as regarding this issue, where before nobody really cared. And there is the angle, in my opinion, of Russia, of course, has its own strategic interest, as Potentialist has many times elucidated. And what I see, honestly, as one of Russia's interests is in its security with St. Petersburg and everything, is the dilution of Finnish nationhood, just like Global Homo wants to do. And I don't see any ways around that.
That certainly fits. It's It's strange. I suppose you can. I'm no expert on psychology or anything like that, but I suppose you can sort of overwhelm a person with enough sort of narrative force to be able to make them believe something strongly that they've never really cared about before. Quite quickly, if you want to. Monophthalmos.
Well, also
sorry.
also classic fear tactics.
Well, sure.
I think that's the bigger part of it right now, at least.
Monophthalmos asks, have the usual suspects renewed the push for Norway to don't join the EU? Yes, but I feel like that's a constant thing. The usual suspects are always pushing to join the EU, and they push to join the EU almost every day, I feel, back when the right was in power for 8 years, because that's mostly they're the most neoliberal of all our parties, I think.
Yeah, I think we touched on it on the previous Longhouse stream, where at least the media is now trying to just squeeze the entire political spectrum into just pro-EU. That's the only sane position that you can take. So it's not so much as Beer Carl says, in that the attitudes towards the United States have changed, but maybe if you poll people or you take another EF referendum, it would weigh in the favor of joining, especially with this Ukraine situation going on.
It's a strange cognitive dissonance in sort of the mainstream mindset of the Norwegian, I suppose, that our image of America is simultaneously good and bad, in the sense that if you ask someone what they think about Americans, they would usually have the media painted redneck George Bush type negative stereotypes about an American, but at the same time America is sort of the cultural hegemon and worshipped in a way every day.
Yeah, I think the more savvy people, they love blue America. Basically, that's the understanding. The kind of Hillary Clinton on the throne type coastal America, but not so much the actual Midland Bible Belters.
Okay, I think. Sorry. Prudentialist just sent me an image here. We're going to do a bit of meme review, I suppose.
Oh boy.
Is this like recent? Is this new?
I have no idea. It's someone had sent it to me in a DM, and I just wanted to share it.
This feels like
chuckle.
a 4chan shit post, but it's like yeah.
Yeah, checkmate, atheists.
Yeah,
I don't know how the
I can't Kiev.
let's just say how the
Kiev, yes.
how the wokies are supposed to deal with this one.
Well, this unfortunately, that's like a long-standing part now at this point of American, I guess, like the mimetic side of foreign policy. Like, I really think that our concept of how we conduct messaging or to rally support has not been the same since Coney 2012. And I know that sounds like ancient history. And if you're
What
not
a time
familiar
to be alive, yeah.
I know. And if you're not familiar with it, God bless you. And ever since then, it's been about these like weird mimetic mass emotional campaigns. Coney 2012, bring back our girls when it came to the issue with Boko Haram. I mean, even now, right? The old post-Afghan, women and girls kind of deal is on display in Ukraine, where they have all those videos where it's like, yeah, our women are ready to fight. Like, this is our country. Like, it's very Sheryl Sandberg lean in girl boss kind of deal.
Yeah, here's a bunch of girls with AKs and they're gonna fight
or like
the
that,
evil...
yeah, like the Ukrainian MP that they had on about getting ready to defend the New World Order, and Tucker Carlson had that picture of her holding the gun inside of her apartment, and I couldn't help but love how cropped that the image was, because right below she's like barefoot with freshly painted nails, because you can't have the degenerates start really noticing things. But like that was something that I had joked about on the Fed post not too long ago, was that it's just like, Eastern Europe has this notorious sex work a reputation. So why not just use the cam girls as a potential index to use the war and how well it's going? So if you start
Yeah.
noticing them going offline in Ukraine, then you know that maybe that city was taken.
Yeah, there's also a very sudden influx of Russian such cam girls posting in Arabic on Instagram and Twitter and all kinds of places. So
Gotta support the Chechens, man.
yeah, you got to get the Russians, not just the Chechens, but I think the wider anti-fascist alliance Russians have going on. They're quite they're focusing their information campaigns on lesser targets where they don't need as much resources as the Americans can with their media complex that we all know.
Well, that's what made the whole Russian election interference to be so hilarious, especially like here we are looking at all of. Why would they conduct a Russian disinfo campaign when, I mean, it's not that'll get filtered out by the mainstream press and the establishment very quickly.
Russia does, do these information campaigns,
of course,
but only in places where it makes sense for them. They can't overwhelm the Western complex. In Finland, they can actually have these alternative influences, like in the small parties I just mentioned earlier. Some of them are, as I've said in the past, quite radiating with the rubles in their pockets. But just as I say that, the dollars in the pockets of the big parties in parliament aren't any better, of course. So Russia does do these campaigns, in their anti-fascist alliance thing, and the neighboring countries with big Russian minorities in the Baltics, for example. I think about, was it 27% of Estonia is ethnic Russian and stuff like this. So on these grounds, they do push on this, but in America, it's a joke. They have no sway.
I'm sorry, I'm still reeling a bit with the Gaddafi stuff, and now Coney 2012. You like sent me back to my old like cringe middle school days, like peak Reddit Walrus times back in the day. Because I was very on board with like, I didn't do anything, of course, because it was slacktivism at its finest, but I was very on board with the Coney stuff back in the day. That's I'll admit that I was young and naive.
Weren't we all?
Yes.
No, I remember that stuff very well too. I was invited into a sort of Facebook group or something, and if you sort of declined, you were like it was demanded that you give a good reason for why you wouldn't show up with like Coney merch and like these sort of essentials where you would spray paint, public roads and other these sort of bridges and stuff with the Coney 2012 logos. I mean, it just had so much sway at the time. It keeps being effective as well. But I don't remember any of it just having that kind of, it doesn't feel as grassroots anymore as it did back then. It felt like there was actually some people who genuinely believed in it. Now it just seems like it's just totally, it exists in the media, but there's no actual interest beyond that.
The whole internet has just become, so astroturfed, I suppose in air quotes in that sense, because it's been so sanitized and like cordoned off into their own
dead internet theory or something.
Yeah, I was about to say dead internet theory, and then people just going on their timelines and being like, astroturfed, psyop, fed. Like, it's a rather myopic but depressing way. I mean, but it's also kind of accurate too. Like, it's very hard now to gauge what is genuinely accurate, like who's set up an organization because they genuinely believe something versus, oh, this guy took 50K from a political group or the Open Society Foundation to make it happen.
Yeah.
I think a big part of this is having in this community these people having the face on it, and people meeting in these IRL meetups. is a big part of, you know, stepping out of this internet sphere where you really have to take everything as a meme and, you know, psyop complete bullshit until you can actually take it seriously. And
Yeah, well, yeah, it's one of those internet things where you know nothing is true until it is, in a sense. It's all memes and LARP and fun. But when you meet up in person, you have to actually care about someone else and talk to someone and hopefully that's something we can do here on the Longhouse at some point in the future.
Fingers crossed.
Leo Borealis is calling me cringe and shaming me for being naive. He's blessed coming from a right-wing family. Well, I will say my dad called me retarded for like believing in that stuff, and I stopped believing quite quickly after that. So I suppose did his job and
Ace
crisis
dad.
averted. Yeah.
all I ever got from my dad was admonishing for actually, you know, caring about stuff, and I should focus on my job more.
You a doctor? You a doctor yet?
No.
So he said, you're not a manager. Well,
Yeah, I'm not
working.
not earning millions yet. No.
Zoomer hyper irony is cringe. I agree, Leo. I'm not saying that I'm engaging in it, but with the way things are going and the way the internet works today, it's, you know, it's not. Maybe at some point it was more real life, but it's certainly not real life today. And it lost that sort of innocence and Wild West nature a long time ago. And so, in a strange way, the new Wild West is to meet people and to basket weave and to do these things.
The desert of the real.
Yes.
I like that expression. That's really how I feel about it. When I show up, like you have these sites like meetups.com or where they used to sort of arrange these sort of random things that I've gone to, and it's not been like, okay, it's like this right-wing stuff, but you have people with other interests, whether it's something technology related or some kind of lifestyle stuff, and you know, you meet like two people who are like insanely awkward and they can't speak for themselves, or it really is like a sort of the desert of the real. It's like nothing compared to the sort of online bonanza that's going on.
Okay, let me go back to my notes here and see if I have anything more. I do not. If there's any questions from the chat, feel free to post them. If you guys have anything you would like to add, this is a bit of a Longhouse special, so I'm not thinking I wasn't thinking we would go for as long as we usually do. These things tend to usually eat up to 3 hours, but it's a Saturday evening, and I don't want to take you guys' time any more than I have.
Oh, I mean, you're good on my end. I don't have anything until like 11 o'clock, so.
Leo Borealis in the chat is calling me a helot.
You can fight IRL on your own time, I guess.
Yeah, I just like the reference.
I will plug that we
meme.
have a Longhouse element or a Matrix channel where we do encourage infighting in the Nordic countries, so you could take your discussions there.
Yeah, our Scandic sort of communities have been really shit at drama. I'm almost a little bit envious of the Americans, like the amount of infighting they're able to do compared to us.
It helps to have a civil war every once in a while.
Oh yeah, maybe we should engage in that and try to spice things up a bit. Nordanon asks, what's worse, Zoomer irony or Gen X cynicism? That's
Zoomer irony.
Can I answer millennial doom? You think the cynicism is worse?
I don't think I honestly I
No.
think that the cynicism is actually better than the hyper irony, because
I think it's more useful if nothing else.
well, me being a cynic all the time is probably going to help me have a better batting average than being completely incomprehensible and unable to communicate in the real.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the one layer of irony wouldn't be that bad, but the whole
7 is too many.
diving in it and having no existence out of it, and these people who literally don't.
And I can
Don't
feel
even-
it
don't-
myself.
yeah.
You know, being millennial, you sort of have a foot in each camp, so I can understand sort of. I can't picture it myself, like how it would be to actually be a Zoomer in terms of like how disconnected you would be today. But I can understand it from my own point of view. Like we talked about, like getting addicted to Twitter stuff. It was a bit of a joke, but if I extrapolate, you know, Twitter is fun to I'm on Twitter 24/7, always checking it. I mean, that's a fucking hell.
Yeah.
That's all I could say about that, really. Like you're so far removed from anything even remotely authentic. I mean, we're talking layers of simulacra here. Or then on ads that the Daria archetype is annoying. Well, that may be, but just don't be an asshole. Like you don't have to go around and be cynical to everyone in your life. And I think that's why I commented this on Twitter to bring that back up when someone was talking about, or I think it was Ryan Turnipseed was posting about people giving him flack for wearing suits in his appearances. And I added that, you know, when I first saw his streams and him showing up in these suits, I had the same sort of knee-jerk reaction of is it feels kind of larpy, or is that maybe it's kind of cringy, but I had to sort of like realign myself and think, you know what, this guy he's being authentic, he's going in for something he believes in. And he's showing up and he's well dressed. I mean, I'm the one who's at fault here for thinking this is cringy. This should be applauded.
I agree 100%. Actually, like people putting effort into it. You know, I've tried to do this myself quite often. I try to dress up, but the general community and the consensus is always to dress down. So that's usually what I have to sort of compromise with people. So maybe I lose the tie, or I have to lose the blazer or something. Can maybe keep the shirt, but yeah.
Yeah, it's for me as well. It would be quite hard to show at my workplace where people are in hoodies, and I, wind up with a 3-piece. I mean, having a collared shirt is already pushing it, for some people when I'm with one.
That's the curse of
It's depressing.
having to work with programmers, is that they will actively distrust you if you show up with like formal attire. I've had people tell me that, I would never trust a programmer that showed up in a suit and tie. Like I would just not respect him at all on like a professional level.
Yeah, ditto. I've heard the exact same thing.
With no hint of irony, right? So there's this whole like identity built around the profession that I haven't been able to escape, which doesn't mean I'm showing up in hoodies, not at all, but I have to tone it down if people are going to take me seriously when I give them advice.
You show up with the sandals and the Star Wars shirt. That's when you're like a real developer.
Like a funny IT t-shirt, or like, oh, this is my Dunder Mifflin t-shirt. Aren't I funny? God.
Look, it's the Linux penguin, guys. It's funny.
I'm sorry, this turned into a rant.
The solution is clearly to have the collared shirt, but leave the top 2 buttons open so it looks more casual.
Well, that's usually what I end up doing. Like that's how I like find like a middle way, is do something like that.
Yeah.
I like the look of the Michael Douglas falling down character. Like he's some 80s IT guy where you have like the short sleeve shirt. And you could have like a pen protector in there. That's kind of a cool look.
I don't think there could have been any other year than 2022 to hear that sentence. Yeah, short sleeve collar shirts and pen protectors are kind of cool.
Oh my
The whole room going,
the decline is real.
You went for the stereotypical nerd outfit of the like yuppie era. Nah, man, look at the drip.
Yeah, we're pushing the window here.
Yeah, we're pushing the Overton window back a bit, aren't we, boys?
Yeah, only the best return content here on the Longhouse. Does Walrus and Ludwig wear suits or bunad on 17th of May? So that's the traditional. It's the traditional attire of the Norwegians. What about you, Ludwig?
No, I wear a suit. Simply because I haven't been able to. I didn't want to.
They're expensive.
Shell out money because it's so expensive to get like something my size. I was put into a bunad, of course, when I was younger, but they just made fun of me for it. I mean, that was in the 90s, right? The sort of it wasn't as cool.
It's
then.
had its resurgence. It's the same thing as you just said. It's like it's coming back around as like an acceptable thing for men to wear. So I'm planning to get one, but they're very expensive if you want to get a real one and get it like well made. So it's going to be saving up for it for a bit. It looks great on women, but it's rarely on men, says Vingle. That's true, and it's very common here still that when you're a teenager, your parents, if you're a girl, your parents will sort of save up for you to buy your costume, and then usually you'll get it when you're older because I mean if you pay for it when you're young and you grow out of it, it's expensive to get it fixed. Okay. Do we have anything more we want to add on this stream? Do we have any more questions in the chat, or should we round off for the night? It's getting a bit late here. It's almost 9:30 p.m. There's no questions from the chat, no questions, no no comments from either of you, I see. So Jay Green River, I see you here. Good evening. You joined just in time for us to end this stream. We're coming up on 2 hours. I think that's good. This was a bit of a out of the way stream anyway. So with that, I thank you all for watching, and I thank you all for coming on to this stream, all of the panelists here. If you have anything you'd like to tell the listeners about that you're either doing or some upcoming content, please shill away.
Well, hopefully I'll have a short Substack piece out on Monday for you all, along with hopefully either a new video Monday evening my time or Tuesday morning, and then a live stream on Thursday, and then we'll be continuing the weekly International Relations show every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Not tomorrow, but the Sunday afterwards. I kind of took Holy Week off for everything, so but yeah, that's what I have going on. There's a lot of stuff written in the works, so Substack, YouTube, and some stuff exclusive for my patrons. But yeah, a lot of good stuff coming up that's all scripted.
Very good. Ludwig Path, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, nothing to shill, just requesting people to hit the like button, share, engage with the content or whatever. And formally just thanking Prudentialist for coming on and boosting the channel and everything. I think that's super cool.
Yeah, you've done quite a lot of work advertising the channel, so we're very grateful for that.
Well, I'm always happy to help another friendly animal avatar.
Just a question, Prude. Did you find this channel because you subbed for like one of the Evola videos, or did you find it related to something else?
Oh goodness, I found you guys because someone had shared a.
I remember what it is.
Yeah,
I did a stream at one point, and you guys had the Ben Hur stuff coming.
Oh,
up.
that's right. Someone
in
had
between that-
Cringewalker or someone had messaged me.
Yeah, and in
you
between
had
that,
mentioned the Ben-Hur video, and then I just watched the whole thing, and I had subbed afterwards because so many familiar faces I had saw were here in this community. So I was like,
Yes.
we'll stick around, and everything
because
turned out to be
I was
good.
doing a stream, and it ended up being this sort of like thing because there was my stream, and then I think was it could have been Radical Liberation. Someone else started their stream pretty much as I ended, so I just shared the link, and it became this sort of like train activity where we would just like jump from one stream to another, and the Ben-Hur was the last one.
Yeah, Monothalmos had messaged me your video, that you had mentioned it, and I listened the whole way through, and then I just listened to some of your other discussions and lectures. I think your your political evolution little lecture talk that you had given, and then I just started
failure of conservatives.
Yeah,
or
the
whatever
failure
they
of
call it,
conservatism one. Yeah. And then I just started watching some of the Longhouse ones. I haven't caught up. I need to watch the Easter special and your black metal stream. But yeah, no, I listen when I can.
You could probably skip the Easter special if you, well, I'm not saying it's bad. It's just, you know, it's a Passover episode really where we talk about minor stuff. I'm not saying if you're listening to this and you haven't watched the Easter special, by the way, you should go watch it because it's very good for everyone but Prudentialist. No, I'm just joking. I just know how hard it can be to follow these things when like multiple people put out like 3-hour streams every week. It's
This is why, unless I'm in a show, I don't watch anything live unless it's like maybe 2 or 3 people that I absolutely will. But I mean, even then, I usually watch everything post, and then I'll watch it at 2 times speed.
Yeah,
and that's a godsend.
But yes, check out the black metal stream. I encourage everyone who's listening to check out that. We had a lot of fun doing it, and I think we had a very good panel for it. And it's a very interesting topic, even though it might be a bit. I know for some of the Christians in the chat, it might be a bit of an affront, but as a cultural phenomenon, it was interesting to explore.
Well, weren't you this close to actually doing the black metal stream?
Yeah,
right on the day of the first Eucharist.
Yes, I and I'm glad you and a couple of other people pointed out that might not be a good idea. And I mean, from a personal sense, I don't mind, but far be it from me to keep stoking the flames between the pagan and the Christians and the community. They can manage that on their own.
Yeah. As regards last remarks, I just wanted to apologize for my sudden entry. I didn't realize we were immediately live.
Yeah, no, I'll take responsibility for that. There was some issue with the messaging application, so you got the link a bit late.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all for watching. Please remember, as Ludwig said, subscribe, comment, share, do whatever. The YouTube algorithm is obviously not very friendly to this kind of content, so we have to keep it in the sphere. And I hope to see you all next time in the chat. Have a good evening.